have Pedro Moreno de los Rios with us today. Pedro is a senior consultant in digital transformation and marketing technology with experience at Atos, Disney, and Ogilvy. He's a celebrated professor and PhD candidate who directs the IE University Tech Labs and leads on immersive learning initiatives. Pedro, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Bob.
So tell me a little bit, can you explain in simple terms about AI and why it's becoming such a big field?
AI is a type of technology that applies computer science to problem solving, to automation, and to many other fields, trying to replicate what humans do, trying to display intelligence in a way that makes sense for human activity. You could argue that artificial intelligence is the ultimate stage of computers in terms of trying to solve problems in a way that humans would, in a very natural way, I would say, that trying to mimic what humans do. It obviously implies taking care of a lot of stuff that humans don't like to do in terms of repetitive tasks, in terms of some manual tasks that you can digitalize. In that way, you gain competitive advantages, obviously. You can solve more problems with less resources. You can solve new problems that humans are unable to reach. And in that way, well, artificial intelligence is that combination of hardware and data and software that will try to get rid of, those mundane tasks that we don't like to do.
Okay, that's very interesting. It leads me to a question about, how AI will shape the future of the work. And I guess, what new types of jobs will emerge from AI?
Um, well, from my point of view, AI is going to transform everything. It's going to transform every single possible definition of a job that we may have today. There's many implications for that. A lot of tasks will be, forgotten in terms of AIs will take over these tasks. But I also think that AIs will not replace what we do. And in that way, AIs for the immediate future are necessary tools for everybody to learn. Everybody should engage with them. We are not replaceable at all. And human input and human supervision of the output into these new technological systems is going to be critical. It's going to be crucial. So whoever tells you that an AI is going to take away your job is probably not being very accurate. You could say that it's taking the hard parts of your job or the boring parts of your job where you struggle, right? By being a lot more precise than humans, that they can also be heavy lifting a lot of the tasks that we now do. It's going to free us in a way that we will be able to engage in more productive tasks, that we will be able to take better care of creativity, for example. Or we will develop new skills in terms of critical thinking. Because you see, when AIs take parts of these jobs, they become kind of like a partner, right? So imagine you and I having this conversation, but there will be an AI also having a conversation with us and participating in a very natural way. So this AI will be able to input some information, pieces of news into the conversation that we may be discussing in our own conversation, and that will enrich the conversation. It could also be like a partner where they will, bounce ideas with you in terms of what are the next possible actions to take. It could also be helpful in terms of predicting or giving you some possible scenarios in terms of probability. Yeah. And by doing so, your task will improve. You will be sure of the decisions that you have to take.
Okay, so a couple of things there. Efficiency will improve with AI potentially. Also, maybe we can make more accurate decisions, data driven.
Efficacy.
And then would you also say that, collaborating as humans with technology will be a key part of embracing AI and getting the best out of it?
Absolutely. Um, it will actually develop into its own field. Right now, there's a strong focus on interfacing. So, how do we interface with computers? How do we input our requests, our prompts, and how the computer outputs the results after computation? With interfaces like voice, for example, bear in mind that when you talk to a computer these days, you're inputting your prompt that word.
Okay, that is fascinating. So, looking at our children today, so ISP students across the world, and the skills that they potentially need to develop now to embrace, life with AI, what would you say would be the core key skills that they'll need to develop early on?
Well, there right now it's mainly for generalists because AI is transformative at all levels, not just vertically in different industries, but also horizontally in all the job positions. Um, but since it's going to be so extensive and so transformative, everybody needs to understand um, how they work. They need to understand logic. They need to get their hands on problem solving mechanisms and methodologies. And one of them is programming. But uh, programming can be a little daunting at first, and everybody may shy away from it. Yes. Also, mathematics. I mean, thinking about programming, a lot of people think about mathematics, and they're right, because it's the basis of how these systems work. So, algebra, statistics, hold on dearly to these courses and these lessons. They're also going to be very important. But not just those. As we were earlier explaining about interfacing with computers, you can also argue that humanities is going to be extremely important, like in terms of ethics, for example. Right now, there's a very important need for ethicists in companies, and that's why there's a lot of anthropologists that are being hired in computer labs. There's a lot of psychologists also being, to join the collective effort to make this technology actually net positive for not just the early students, but for humanity at large.
Mm, that's interesting. So there's touching upon this kind of multidisciplinary approach to AI and future careers. And what advice would you then give to parents in terms of nurturing skills and developing these skills for students or for their children at an early age? Um,
Well, I mean, it's very straightforward. Get them exposed. Get them exposed in an organized and structured manner, not just this. Here's the computer. Go ahead and explore, which is also very interesting because you get different outcomes. But I would encourage them to have like a structured path, even though y- it doesn't necessarily have to be complex. It can be very simple, but there's tons of online courses. There's tons of hackathons. There's many initiatives that they can join. There's Coursera, there's Khan Academy, there's online resources. The thing is that the wealth of information out there is incredible. Yeah, and it's basically leading your child into the appropriate course, into the appropriate piece of information, so that they can enjoy it. Yeah, which is a very fundamental part of this.
And that's really interesting because I'm really interested in your background as well. And how did you tweak your interest in AI and emerging technologies? And you obviously had lovely exposure as an 11-year-old to opportunities to build your own computers. Is that where it all tweaked?
Yes, and I have this interest. It's going to sound funny, but in science fiction movies, and I always saw, like, the AIs that were in those movies, that as characters and robots and stuff, and that I always dreamt about, when is this going to happen? And I've always looked forward into the future, and I've always followed the trends to see, to try to predict, when was this going to happen, if it was going to happen. So I would say that, as for many actual scientists and technologists, um, because obviously you think about novels like Jules Verne, for example, novels, they inspired actual scientists in making those fantasies come alive, in terms of the submarines and helicopters and new methods of transportation. Well, in a similar way, I could argue that a lot of the fantasies that some cultural products have inspired into me would actually make me, be extremely interested in participating in these kinds of projects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Looking now more holistically on industries and how AI is impacting industries and different sectors. Which industries do you think are going to be impacted the most? And which ones are already being impacted significantly, would you say?
I would say all of them. I'm sorry for that.
The great set.
It's a general answer that adds very little value, I would say, but that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, um,
Okay, so which one's been impacted the most then? So if you say that all of them are being impacted, are there particular ones that are actually um, ahead with AI?
well, ahead of AI, with I would say the financial industry has been for a long time impacted by these systems. Healthcare is the one that right now is getting a lot of exposure and impact from AI. And in the entertainment industry as well is getting largely impacted, and education as well. You probably know, but I would say those are the job descriptions, maybe, in terms of industries, those that are more technical in a way and less of human interactions.
So I at ISP, there's a big focus on sparking curiosity. And it's great to hear some examples from you on, different ways to spark those curiosities as well. One area or one thing that we haven't necessarily mentioned is passion and nurturing passion from an early age, similar to your nephew, similar to yourself. Um, you know, what advice would you give to parents if their child is, passionate about certain areas? What advice would you give to them?
Well, let me speak for the more geeky, for example, kids. Yeah, I used to be a geeky kid, so I feel quite, you know, uh, how do you say, identified with the geeky kids. Um, yeah, a lot of parents may actually shy away from it, and or have straight up fears of exposing their kids to these technologies. Uh, my message to them is that technology has constantly being a threat and something positive. Yeah? At the end of the story, technology is always positive. Some things may not work, but we will fix them to get them to work. And yeah, even though AI has many threats, there's this consensus, and it's not optimism. It's actually, you objectively look at the history of technology, and it's always come out on top. It's always come out right. So I don't see why this time around it will not. I think that the fear should be focused on not using these technologies. Okay, because technology, after all, is neutral, and it's mainly about who has the technology and who knows how to use the technology that should be contemplated as a threat rather than a technology itself. You understand? Um, and yes, obviously, as I told you earlier, get them exposed in a supervised manner, in a structured manner, is in many instances the best possible scenario for early exposure to young kids. Yeah.
Okay, this is a fascinating discussion, and I'm learning a lot as a parent. But if you had kind of one key piece of advice for parents, to support their children and maybe just even having meaningful conversations about AI, what would that be?
Well, I would say to try to get them exposure, as I said, in a supervised way. And at the same time, yeah, having these conversations is important so that they understand from the get go what are the limits of this, because um, it's all about the intention when you approach the technology. So, as I said earlier, you can use it for good and you can use it for bad. Yeah? And try to instill a sense of an ethical and responsible use of these technologies.
So, where would you say that training should come from? Is that kind of self taught? They go online, they look for ac- uh, ethical websites,
Obviously,
information?
when you go into a structured course, they give you the necessary tools and the sources of information that we professors, for example, are confident with, that they can be trustworthy. Um, right now, there's a ton of content on AIs that is not very trustworthy, as you could imagine, and that could also be part of the key learnings of at a young age, for them to understand that the source of information is as important as the tool itself, so that the outcome is positive. And we've been talking about this for a few minutes now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess on that note, thank you for helping us validate to parents, the importance of AI and how to potentially support their children, maybe interested in careers and what the future careers are in AI and how it's going to affect future industries as well.
Well, as I told you, there's every level, vertical, every industry is going to get impacted. Every possible job from top to the bottom of the organization is going to be impacted. Some will be active impact in terms of you will need to use more tools. Some will also be passive in terms of these technologies will tell the workers how to shape their everyday tasks, and everybody should engage in them. Everybody.
And I guess ethics and policy around AI doesn't necessarily need the technical scientific knowledge. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to negotiate. So that's kind of an add-on future career area.
Ideally, you would need to be you would need to have literacy in three main components, or areas of your academic development. You should be versed in computers, in how computers work, in the science behind computers. Ideally, you should also have knowledge of maths, like statistics, and algebra. And the third component would be the acumen of the vertical, so or the field. Whenever you have this trifecta of skills, you're bound to be, a very sought after professional by having these three areas covered. So let me repeat them. Yeah.
Yes, please do.
Computer science, maths, and vertical acumen. Yeah? Whether that's marketing or business or ethics or psychology. Yeah? This combination is right now at the very top of the job-seeking organizations, that seek for human resources. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very strong message to parents there as well. What about creativity? There's a lot of focus, I think, globally on creative skills within AI. Where does that fall into the skills and the areas that you've been developing?
How is AI mainly going to impact? Well, there's two sides of it. Is the side of the input and the side of the output. So in terms of the side of the output, being able to give the best input into an AI system, and not just that, but the output too, to be critical about what kind of results is the AI providing and which is the one that is the best one. Yeah. So the creative side is mainly from the input side. Yeah. The other part on the output side is critical thinking, to be able to reason in a human way and choose which one is providing the highest value possible that these AI systems can provide in a human way, right? So it needs to be valid and valued by other humans. That's why I think that fully automated systems are going to be not ideal. They will always need human supervision on the other side so that they make sure that the output from these systems are humanly valued.
Okay, that's good news.
Definitely.
That's good news.
I always tell my students, don't automate fully anything. Yeah. Because there's a tendency to, this is automatic, the machine takes care of it, and I don't have to do anything, which is terrible. There's a temptation to take whatever the machine has spit out, in terms of when you're using one of these chatbots, and not even reading it, and that's actually terrible because they don't check. And maybe the machine has made mistakes. Maybe the machine has misinterpreted something. Maybe the machine may actually hallucinate at some point, because there's also this problem that some AI systems still are not accurate enough. So by not checking and thinking it's automatic, they may actually get themselves into trouble, and getting results that are not valuable at all.
So I can think about, using a translation app. And you input your language and it converts to a different language. And actually, the meaning comes back differently. But you see those classic examples where it's gone wrong, where the translation doesn't actually mean something, it means something completely different. And I'm sure some people have got into trouble for that because, the meaning is lost.
Oh, yes.
And because no one's checked it, Yeah.
And it's important, right? You take the legal practice, for example, and you take a contract, yeah, and you put it through one of these translating AIs, and at the other end, it may actually translate some very important legal terms that have a different meaning than uh, the literal translation of these words, and that can have huge implications, right? I remember this case of a car dealership. Yeah, I think it was just an experiment where they asked the AI to sell the highest number of cars. So the AI started to sell the cars at $1. Yeah, so did it get to the objective? Of course, but they didn't look into the particulars of um, and that comes to show you, the dangers of automation. There's always going to have to implement some kind of quality control.
Yeah.
And the nature of our jobs is going to shift a lot towards quality control. More than quality is human quality control, right? Which of the results is the best? And for that, you need criteria. You need to apply critical thinking. You need to know which, result is the one that actually goes.
So an element of common sense always needs to be applied to the technology in a way. So we can't compensate and expect technology to make all those common sense decisions, but it can help us lead to the right decision.
Well, yeah, you could say so. Yeah, I mean, common sense is subjective. It's not an objective result. Yeah, but even when you're looking at objective results that come out of AI system, humans will need to go and check. Otherwise, they will have may pass to hazards that are unwanted and to results that are subpar.
Okay. Listen, it's been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate your time and your input, and obviously your expertise on this really topical area of artificial intelligence, and supporting our parents to gain confidence, and having meaningful conversations with their children about it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.